She laughed and said, "You're cute when you're jealous," after I caught her ex leaving our apartment. I said, "Thanks." Then I showed her just how cute I could be. The next week, she wasn't laughing anymore after discovering what I did. I, 32M, caught my girlfriend's ex leaving our apartment. She thought my jealousy was cute. She was wrong. The key turned in the lock at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I remember the exact time because I'd been staring at my phone, waiting for the client call that never came. Working from home had its perks, but today it meant I was there when I shouldn't have been. I heard voices from the living room before I saw anything. Her laugh, then a deeper voice I recognized but hadn't heard in our apartment for over 6 months. My stomach dropped as footsteps moved toward the front door. I stepped into the hallway just as the door was closing. She turned around, startled, her face flushing red. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and her shirt was wrinkled in a way that made my chest tighten. She asked why I was home early, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I told her my afternoon meeting got canceled. Then I asked the question that was burning in my throat, why her ex had been in our apartment. She laughed. Actually laughed. She said he'd just stopped by to pick up some old books he'd left behind months ago. She moved closer, running her hand down my arm, telling me I was being paranoid. Then came the words that would replay in my head for days. I was cute when I was jealous. I said thanks. Just thanks. But something cold settled in my chest as I watched her casual dismissal of my concerns. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the timeline. Her ex lived across town. If he was just picking up books, why was he here for 2 hours? I'd seen his car parked down the street when I'd grabbed lunch at noon. The next morning, she was extra affectionate. She made my coffee exactly how I liked it and kissed me goodbye longer than usual. She told me she loved me and that I had nothing to worry about. But her phone buzzed constantly during breakfast, and she kept it face down on the table. I decided to do something I'd never done before. I installed a security app on our shared laptop, the one she used for work. It felt wrong, but her dismissive laughter kept echoing in my mind. If I was being paranoid, I'd prove myself wrong and uninstall it. If I wasn't, 3 days later, I had my answer. The app showed she'd been video calling someone for hours each day while I was supposedly at the office. The call logs lined up perfectly with times I told her I had meetings. I dug deeper into our shared cloud storage and found photos from last weekend, photos of her and her ex at the coffee shop downtown while I was visiting my parents. But it was the messages I found that broke something inside me. Months of planning. Months of her complaining about me to him. How I was boring. How I didn't understand her like he did. How she was only staying with me until she figured out her next move. The most recent message thread was from yesterday. She was telling him how suspicious I was getting, how I'd almost caught them. He suggested they be more careful. She replied that I was too trusting and stupid to figure anything out. That's when the cold feeling in my chest turned into something else entirely. I spent the next 2 days planning. I worked from a coffee shop, telling her I needed a change of scenery. Really, I was making phone calls and sending emails from somewhere she couldn't overhear. First, I called my lawyer, an old college friend who owed me a favor. I explained the situation and asked about lease agreements and evidence collection. He told me what I needed to know about protecting myself legally. Then I called her workplace. I'd met her manager several times at company events. I explained that I was planning a surprise for my girlfriend, but needed to confirm she'd be out of town for work next week like she'd mentioned. The manager was confused. There was no work trip scheduled. In fact, they'd been trying to reach her about covering extra shifts. That's when I realized her ex lived in the city she'd claimed the work trip would take her to. I made one more call. To our landlord. Our lease was in both our names, but I'd been the one paying rent for the past year while she claimed to save money. I asked about the process for removing someone from the lease agreement and what documentation I'd need. Friday evening, she announced her work trip. She'd be gone Monday through Thursday, she said, and seemed excited about the break. She packed light, which made sense now that I knew she'd be staying at her ex's place. Monday morning, I watched her leave from our bedroom window. I waited 30 minutes, then got to work. First, I changed all the passwords on our shared accounts, streaming services, utilities, internet. Then I packed all her belongings. Not hastily, but carefully, treating her things with more respect than she'd treated our relationship. Everything went into boxes I'd bought over the weekend. I moved all her furniture to a storage unit I'd rented under her name. I even set up automatic payments from her account. She'd given me access months ago when she was too lazy to handle her own bills. The storage unit would be paid for 6 months, giving her plenty of time to figure out what to do with her things. The apartment looked bigger without her stuff. Emptier, but cleaner somehow. Tuesday, I met with the landlord and my lawyer. With the documented evidence of her lies and the fact that I'd been solely responsible for rent, removing her from the lease was straightforward. I paid a penalty fee to make it happen quickly. Wednesday, I had the locks changed. The landlord's idea, actually. He said it was standard procedure when someone was removed from a lease. Thursday morning, I got a text from her. She was having so much fun on her work trip, she said. She'd be home around noon and couldn't wait to see me. I was at work when she arrived. My new office setup didn't give me a view of our building, but I could imagine her confusion. First the key not working, then realizing her things were gone. My phone started ringing at 12:15 p.m. When I answered, she was screaming. Not yelling, screaming. She demanded to know what I'd done with her stuff, why the locks were changed, where everything was. Her voice was shrill with panic. I told her calmly that I'd found out about her lies. About her ex. About the fake work trip. About the months of planning to leave me while living in my apartment and letting me pay for everything. She started crying then, asking how I could do this to her. She said she'd made a mistake, that it wasn't what it looked like, that we could work through this. I told her where to find the storage unit key, with the building manager, and reminded her that she had 6 months of payments covered. I also mentioned that I'd forwarded all relevant documentation to my lawyer, just in case. But I wasn't done. That evening, I sent a carefully crafted message to her ex. I introduced myself politely and explained that since they were clearly back together, he should probably know about her financial situation. I attached screenshots of her maxed-out credit cards, her overdue student loans, and the debt collectors who'd been calling our home phone for months. I also mentioned, casually, that she'd been telling me for weeks how much she missed him and was planning to break up with me. I suggested he might want to ask her why she hadn't followed through on that plan months ago. Friday night, my phone buzzed with frantic messages from her. Her ex had suddenly become unavailable. He'd stopped responding to her calls and texts. She was staying at her sister's place now, begging me to let her come home. She said she'd made a terrible mistake, that she loved me, that she'd do anything to fix this. I replied once. I told her she was right about one thing. I had been cute when I was jealous, but I was much cuter when I was thorough. Update 1. A week later, she tried a different approach. She showed up at my office building, waiting by the entrance when I left for lunch. She looked smaller somehow, wearing the same clothes I'd seen her in 3 days earlier. She begged me to listen. She said her ex had kicked her out, that she had nowhere to go, that she'd lost her job because she'd lied about the work trip and missed too many shifts. I told her that sounded like a series of consequences, not my problem. She grew angry then, saying I'd ruined her life over a misunderstanding. She claimed nothing physical had happened with her ex, that they were just talking about old times. I pulled out my phone and showed her one of the photos I'd found, the two of them kissing outside a restaurant last month. The timestamp showed it was taken on my birthday, while I was working late to pay for the surprise dinner I'd planned for her that weekend. Her face went white. She started crying again, saying she was sorry, that she'd been confused, that she wanted to come home. I told her she was home. She was exactly where her choices had led her. Update 2. 2 weeks after that confrontation, I heard through mutual friends that she'd moved back in with her parents 2 hours away. Her ex had apparently started dating someone new, someone without debt and with a stable job. A month later, she created a fake social media account to message me. She said she'd gotten therapy, that she understood now how wrong she'd been, that she wanted a chance to make things right. I screenshot the message and sent it to my lawyer, just in case, then blocked the new account. 3 months later, I ran into her sister at the grocery store. She apologized for what had happened, saying her sister had always been impulsive and selfish. Then she mentioned something interesting. My ex had been telling people I'd stolen her belongings and left her homeless over a minor argument. I smiled and thanked her sister for the information. That evening, I created a group chat with some of our mutual friends and shared a few choice screenshots from the evidence I collected. Nothing vindictive, just the truth. Her messages about finding me boring and stupid. Her fake work trip. Her months of deception. I prefaced it by saying I normally wouldn't share private matters, but since she was spreading lies about me, people deserved to know the actual story. The response was immediate. Several friends reached out to apologize for believing her version of events. A few admitted they'd suspected something was off with her story but hadn't wanted to get involved. Update 3. 6 months after everything imploded, I was in a much better place. The apartment felt like mine again. I'd redecorated, bought new furniture, and even adopted a dog, something she'd always vetoed. I'd also started dating someone new. Someone who was honest about her schedule, who didn't hide her phone, who actually worked the job she claimed to have. That's when my ex made her final play. She somehow got my new girlfriend's number and called her directly. She introduced herself as my ex-fiancée. We'd never been engaged, and said she was concerned about the new relationship. She claimed I was controlling and had thrown her out without warning over a minor disagreement. My new girlfriend listened politely, then asked a simple question. If I was so controlling and unreasonable, why was my ex so determined to get back together with me? Apparently, my ex hadn't expected that response. She stumbled through some explanation about still caring about my well-being, but my girlfriend had already lost interest. When my girlfriend told me about the call that evening, she was more amused than concerned. She said anyone desperate enough to track down and call a stranger clearly wasn't over the relationship, and that made her feel more secure about us, not less. I realized then that my ex had never understood the difference between consequences and cruelty. She'd mistaken my thorough response for vindictiveness, when really it had just been self-preservation. She'd laughed when she called me cute for being jealous. She'd thought jealousy was my only response to betrayal. She'd underestimated everything else I was capable of when pushed far enough. A year later, I heard she'd moved to another state and was working retail while living with roommates. Her ex had gotten married, not to her. Her debt had apparently gotten worse, and she'd had to declare bankruptcy. None of that brought me satisfaction. It just felt like the natural endpoint of choices she'd made. I never responded to any of her attempts to reconnect. I never acknowledged her existence after that day I'd shown her the photo. Sometimes the most powerful response to someone who's treated you as disposable is to prove them right, by disposing of them completely. She'd been wrong about me being too trusting and stupid to figure things out. But she'd been right about one thing. I was cute when I was jealous. I was absolutely adorable when I was thorough. The storage unit payments ran out after 6 months, just like I'd planned. I never found out what happened to her belongings after that. Honestly, I never wondered. Some people mistake kindness for weakness and trust for stupidity. My ex learned too late that quiet people aren't always harmless people. We just pick our battles carefully. And when we finally choose to fight, we don't fight to wound. We fight to win.